It was recently revealed on a podcast that Jeremy Swayman thought he was going to be drafted by the Toronto Maple Leafs, but instead they went for another goaltender. Today we're going to take a look at the 2017 draft, take a look at what almost transpired, and we're also going to take a look at how the Leafs have actually struggled drafting goalies in the last number of years. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we're going to be doing a little bit different kind of a video, but we had a bit of a revealing bit of information on a recent podcast hosted by John Scott, former NHL player, who interviewed Jeremy Swayman, of course, goaltender for the Boston Bruins. They were talking about his draft year back in 2017. Jeremy Swayman went on to talk about how he really thought that if he was drafted, there was a really high probability that he was going to be drafted by the Toronto Maple Leafs. Of course, goaltenders sometimes get drafted early. The goalies with high pedigree that are kind of looked upon as being a little bit more of a sure thing to be a solid, hopefully long-time NHL quality goaltender. You do see that happen sometimes, but most goalies on average are anywhere from your third, fourth, fifth round. A lot of them actually in the sixth or seventh round, and even way back when the draft used to be longer and had more rounds, there was usually even deeper than that. But obviously the draft has changed over the years as well as the number of teams have changed. Of course, each round's a little bit longer, so there's not as many rounds as there used to be, but overall, similar number of draft choices. Back in 2017, Jeremy Swayman was drafted by the Boston Bruins, of course, 111th overall. Has certainly gone through some good development and has really become a big part of the Bruins team. And I think it's fair to say that he's now established himself as a regular, solid NHL goalie. He's had some really good numbers, some really good success so far. And the other reason I found this interesting, and anybody who's been a long-time hockey fan, especially of these two franchises, whether the Leafs or the Bruins, will know that it's not the first time that there's been a goaltender between these two franchises that have changed teams and certainly had a large number of success. I mean, obviously he didn't really change teams, but the link there I just thought was very, very interesting. Of course, here is the list of some picks that went right around the same time in the 2017 NHL Draft. The Toronto Maple Leafs ended up drafting Ian Scott. Now, at the time, you could look and say Ian Scott, it's debatable. Really, like you think that Jeremy Swayman might have been the better pick. Now, we know today, and of course, it's easy to look back. Of course, it's easy to say, with hindsight, looking back, that it's easy to pick who they should have taken. But Jeremy Swayman was taken the very next pick, 111th overall, by the Boston Bruins. Of course, Swayman was talking about the fact that he was watching the draft online. The Leafs were getting ready to pick. He really thought that this was going to be the round. Like, he knew he wasn't going to go super high or anything like that in the draft. Looking at the Leafs selections, and based on his conversations, he was extremely confident that if he was going to be selected, the odds of it being in Toronto were extremely high. So when they, at the 110th overall pick, announced Ian Scott, he said he was kind of devastated. He was really shocked and surprised that it wasn't him, and he really thought that it wasn't going to happen for him. Like, at this point, based on who he had talked to before the draft, there really wasn't a lot of conversations, and he was starting to think, I'm not going to get drafted. And he said he was having trouble with his internet after that, and apparently he started getting messages shortly thereafter, within a few minutes, saying, congrats, you're a Bruin. And he was really confused, not knowing what, because he had, because of the glitch in his stream, that he wasn't able to hear the announcement that the Bruins had selected him. So obviously things worked out for Swayman, no doubt. But I just got thinking when I first heard this news from the podcast, it got me thinking about Maple Leaf goaltender history. Of course, we know right now the Leafs especially are in a major transition period where they brought in a whole new goalie tandem this year. Of course, we saw Jack Campbell depart via free agency. Of course, he was traded and brought in from the Los Angeles Kings. And we know that Matt Murray came over from a trade in Ottawa. We know that Ilya Samsonov came over from Washington as he was let go there as it became a free agent. And it just got me thinking all the recent histories. Like, it's been a long time since the Toronto Maple Leafs have actually drafted a goaltender who went through their system and developed and became a successful starting goaltender, or even a successful backup that's had a solid, regular NHL career. So I got thinking back, and I was like, I can only think of one or two, really, since I was quite young, a long, long time ago, in the last 20 to 30 years. I could only think of a couple goalies that I knew off the top of my head were, drafted developed and became Maple Leafs and actually had a good amount of success, even if they went on to do that with other teams too. So I went back, looked through, I used hockeydb.com, great resource for NHL draft history, if you want to go through all the drafts. I started with 2017 and went back, because as we know, goaltenders typically take 3 to 5 years to really have a good amount of development time. I think it's fair, before they really have a real legit shot of being an NHL goalie. So I didn't want to go much sooner than 2017. Figured that's where this story begins, with Ian Scott, Jeremy Swayman. Let's look back further. Of course, we know Ian Scott, at the time that he was drafted, the numbers from his junior results weren't the greatest. So I do see there being an argument that Swayman should have been the pick. Now, of course, Ian Scott, after that, went on to have a heck of a finish to his junior career. Like, after he was drafted, the results in the team in front of him got better. That helped too. And obviously, like, he went on to have a real solid run in the Western Hockey League. Ended up, I believe he even played in the Memorial Cup. Like, it was a real solid end to his junior career. So things looked extremely promising for Scott. And of course, we know now, here we are, 2022, 5 years later. Swayman's becoming a regular NHL goalie with a good amount of success, great numbers. Ian Scott's never played a game in the NHL. He's barely played a lot in the minors either. He's dealt with a ton of injuries and just recently announced his retirement. So, of course, like I said, the fact that we heard a story about a player thought he was getting drafted by one team, ended up going to another. Sometimes it's not all that interesting, but it just so happens, like I said, I found it more interesting than I probably would have otherwise, just because of what's transpired with Ian Scott. We already got the news recently that he was calling it quits and retiring. So, of course, Swayman's in a different spot. And then I said I thought it would be fun to look back here at the recent draft history of goaltenders. Now, of course, this has also spawned another project for me. So if you're saying, well, the Leafs are not the only team that might struggle to draft goalies, you're probably right. And I'm going in the process right now of doing some research on other teams, and I will do a video. I'm not sure exactly when it's going to be released, when it's going to come out, so don't pressure me for it, but I am going to take some time and research the other 31 teams. Of course, other teams like Seattle was no point because they haven't been around long, even Vegas for that matter. But, we're going to look through them to see how common this is. It really got me thinking. Is like, you know what? This is a topic I haven't seen covered through NHL YouTube, and something I found interesting, so we're going to talk about it. But looking back before this, in 2016, the Maple Leafs did draft Joseph Woll. He's played 4 games to this point. He was taken number 62 overall in that draft. He still has potential. We're not going to rule him out as being a bust at this point. Although the fact that he's only played 4 games, after all this time, 6 years after being drafted, is concerning. But he is still in the system. He certainly, I think it's fair to say the Leafs don't have a ton of confidence that he's anywhere near ready for the NHL, or they wouldn't have went out and gotten 2 brand new goaltenders this year, but they did. And of course, besides them, they have Erik Källgren, and of course, they have him as well. So to me, he's probably the 4th ranked goalie in the franchise on the depth chart. So 6 years after being drafted, I still think he has potential, but he's going to have to be a late bloomer if he's going to be anything at this point. Now, looking back further than that, 2015 and 2014, the Leafs never drafted any goaltenders at all. 2013, they drafted Antoine Bibeau, was the only goalie they selected. Of course, he's still kicking around as a minor league goalie. He was taken at number 172 overall. He's only played 4 NHL games 9 years after being drafted. So, he's certainly not going to develop into anything much besides a journeyman minor leaguer. Maybe gets a few NHL games under his belt before he's done. Hard to say. In 2012, they didn't draft any goalies either. So, leading up to this 2017 draft where they had this Ian Scott, Jeremy Swayman debate, they had only taken 2 goaltenders in 5 years between Bibeau in 2013 and Woll in 2016. So for starters, I think they should have been trying to get more goalies than the prospect pool, and that might have helped here because, of course, we know it seems like they've been having a hard time keeping a starting goaltender. When they have found one that's lasted a while, it's been via trade. Like they traded for Jack Campbell. Before him, they traded for Frederik Andersen. That's difficult to find. Goalies that are good and going to be NHL goalies, teams don't want to give up. And you can't always rely on other teams having an abundance of them in order to try to snag one from their system. Now, going back further in 2011, that's when they got Garrett Sparks. I think there was some hope and optimism for Sparks, especially at one point. He had a real good run in the minors with the Marlies. Never materialized, though. I think there's a lot of different issues there on and off the ice that led to that. He has played 40 games in the NHL. He was drafted 190th overall that year in 2011. But again, we're a decade plus past that. He never materialized into an NHL goaltender. In 2010 and 2009, again, no goalies selected. So from 2009 all the way up to 2017, there's only 4 goalies. Now, that's not a lot over that stretch of time. Now, before that, we go to 2008. They drafted a goalie by the name of Grant Rolheiser, 158th overall, never played. Honestly, I've never heard of him. In 2007, again, no goalies picked. That takes us back to 2006, which was the last time the Leafs drafted a goalie who had an NHL career that was remotely successful, and a lot of it with the Leafs, but of course elsewhere as well, and that's James Reimer. He's the first guy that came to mind when I started thinking about this. Before I started doing the research, I was like, James Reimer is the only recent one that comes to mind, and there is one more before that, which we'll get to here shortly, but Reimer at this point in his career, he's played 453 games, had a good run with the Leafs, had some success for sure, has been a pretty consistent guy. I mean, he doesn't always get a lot of accolades, but Reimer's been solid. He was taken number 99 overall in 06, and of course, he's the last one the Leafs have taken that's had any success as a Leaf. Of course, 2005 was the last time that the Leafs and Bruins were connected by goalies, and for, like I said, the hardcore fans that have been around a while, you're going to know this already, but of course, the Maple Leafs drafted Tuukka Rask. They actually did a really good thing that year, but then he was traded before he could ever play for the Leafs. He was traded for Andrew Raycroft, who had a solid rookie year for the Bruins, and then slowly started going a little bit downhill, in my opinion. You gotta wonder why the Bruins were so eager to trade a goalie who was still young, and for at that point an unproven Tuukka Rask. Obviously, we know how that trade worked out. Tuukka Rask went on for an all-star career with the Bruins. Raycroft didn't last too long in Toronto, never worked out, and just slowly, continued to go downhill and just never got that game back. So obviously, that was a good draft year, but they kind of blew it by trading him, and that trade I know has been analyzed to death and talked about and rehashed numerous times, so we're not going to go into great detail, but that was a connection. I was like, oh, this isn't the first time that there was a bit of a goalie controversy, if you will, between Toronto and Boston. Of course, in 2004, before that, they took Justin Pogge. Justin Pogge was a great junior goalie who came in with a lot of promise, a lot of potential. I believe he played with Team Canada and the juniors and stuff. He had a real solid run at that level. Never materialized in the NHL. He was a 90th pick in that draft. Only played 7 NHL games. 2003, they took no goalies. 2002, drafted a goalie by the name of Todd Ford, who I don't even remember. Never played in the NHL. Was taken 74th overall. Never worked out. 2001, took a goalie called named Jan Chauvin, 213th overall. Never played in the NHL. In 2000, they took a couple of goalies. Neither really worked out, but there was some limited NHL action between Mikhail Telkvist and JF Racine, taking number 70 and number 90 respectively. And you can go back even further. The last goalie before Reimer, you got to go all the way back to 1990, which is when they had Felix Potvin. Now, your longtime hardcore fans that are older or around my age are going to know Felix Potvin, the Cat. He played 640 career games. He was taken 31st overall in 1990. He was a real solid goalie for a long time for the Maple Leafs. But besides Potvin and Reimer, they really haven't drafted a goalie in the last 30 years that's gone on to have any amount of success with the team. And for the most part, outside of Rask being traded, none of them have had any success elsewhere either. So it's like, yes, they traded one prospect goalie that they messed up on. Otherwise, it just has not gone well. And like I said, I'm not here to, give the Leafs a bad name. I'm not here just to kind of, talk about how terrible they draft. Clearly, this team in recent years has gotten really good at drafting. I mean, look at the young talent that they've amassed in the last 6, 7, 8 years between Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, William Nylander. There's a lot of players on that roster. Morgan Riley's another. Like a lot of the younger players too, like Robertson that's coming up. Matthew Nyes looks like real solid. Sandin Liljegren, they've done a real good job more recently of drafting. It's just the goalie position, and I understand it's unique, it's tough, and I do, like I said, I intend on digging deeper into this to see how common is this. Now, I want to see how this compares, because of the Maple Leafs being one of the more iconic franchises in the league, one of the more heavily discussed teams in the league. We know they're a team that's on the rise, but it seems like forever that they've been trading for goalies to get themselves, in contention. And for the most part, it hasn't really worked out. It's been a position that's been like a revolving door for long stretches. They've had some time where it's been stable for a while. Like I said, with Freddie Anderson, they had a good, long, stable run. Jack Campbell gave them a couple of years, but really, that's ideally not really what you want to see. You love to see a team like Carey Price comes to mind in Montreal. They drafted him high. He developed there, had a long, successful career. Of course, recently is now going on LTIR, but still, it's just an example that comes to mind on what you would like to see teams do. Obviously, you want, like any other position, it's a draft and development league. It's really difficult to rely on free agency or trades to fill out star players on your roster. So I thought this information was rather interesting. Swayman thought for sure he was going to be able to leave. Ended up being a Bruin. Got looking into it. It ended up being Ian Scott, the pick, who just retired. Just to me, it's just a lot of different news that just kind of connected recently. And I thought we'd do some research. And then from there, like I said, it's going to spawn me into doing more research just to see how common of an issue this is, where you just don't draft and develop goaltenders. It's certainly a need that they should focus on, and I'd like to see how many other teams are in the same boat, and I intend to dig deeper to find that out. So let me know your thoughts on this Jeremy Swayman story. Would you like to have seen him be a Toronto Maple Leaf? Does it kind of hurt a little bit that, again, the Bruins took the goalie away from the Leafs, although this one was more of the Leafs choosing. And, we'll see how things could have worked out. Let me know your thoughts on the Leafs drafting of goalies, and we'll talk about that in the comments. If you're new to the channel, of course, you make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.